Today, we're going to be looking at the subject of the importance of coming into peace, rest and peace. You know, in Psalm 37 and verse 7, it says, "Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass." And so it says, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. One of the problems we all have is that with patience, because God lives in a different time frame than we do, we have a problem with patience and time, waiting for things. It says, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself because of him who prospereth in his way. The word rest here in the Hebrew literally means to settle down. You know, when you tell your kids they're running around everywhere, you tell them to settle down. Well, that's the same word, settle down. Be at rest, be at ease. In Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 11, we read, "Let us labor therefore to enter into rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief." So rest and unbelief are linked together here, but it says labor to enter into rest. Now that seems like a contradiction, doesn't it? Labor, in other words, it means make it a project, it's an important. You must get this right. That's what it's saying. And rest and unbelief are connected. If you don't believe that God is in control, you're going to have a problem of coming into rest. And so, as we move on into a new day, into the Feast of Tabernacles, or whatever we call it, the Promised Land, we need to understand what is required of us, because we've never been here before. We've been in Pentecost a long time, but we've never been in the Promised Land or the Feast of Tabernacles. We're just entering that now. And the Promised Land was called, and it's very significant, their rest. Now, this is very significant. There were giants in the land, and he said this was called their rest. Again, it seems like a contradiction. Giants in the land, but they had to overcome their fear and restlessness and unbelief. In other words, it's a state of heart and a state of mind. Coming into rest, now listen to me, coming into rest is one of the biggest giants you are going to have to defeat. Coming into rest is one of the greatest internal battles that you will face. And it takes some time to be able to come into this place. But if we don't come into rest, in the days ahead, we're not going to survive the days that are ahead of us. So it's connected with faith, it's connected with believing God, trusting God, coming into rest. That has to become now a prime quest for us, because we cannot really proceed too further into the Promised Land until we overcome this internal battle, this internal giant. You know, we go through God-ordained number of tests in order for us to move on in God. But this one is the first one they had to overcome. When they overcame this one, it was relatively easy to continue, into the Promised Land. So fear and rest. Numbers chapter 14:22 says, "Because of all these men who have seen my glory and my signs which I did in Egypt in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now 10 times. 10 times. God gave him an opportunity to overcome. And it says, they put me to the test now these 10 times and have not listened to my voice. So, the underlying failure here was they could not trust God. And you say, oh, well, I trust God. It's not that easy when you're in difficult circumstances, when things are not going right and not going how you think they should be going. This is one of the greatest exams, the greatest tests that you need to pass. And you cannot proceed further, much further into the promised land until you get this one right. So, we come to a place of absolute peace and rest in the Lord. You know, the lack of trust in God, there were two things really: fear, because there were giants in the land. Fear and a lack of trust in God caused them to fail. Now, Israel was faced with a number of tests, 10 at least tests in the wilderness. And finally, this was their last chance. They came right to the promised land and failed. Now, we've come a long way. We've all come a long way in God, but we now come to this point in time. You either fail and go back into the wilderness, or we get it right. And it means like fear, spirit of fear, unbelief, these giants, which are internal. We are the promised land. It's internal. We have to overcome this. That's why Paul in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 1 said, let us fear. Now, we are not told many times in the Bible to fear, but let us fear lest the promise being left of us of entering into his rest, if any of you should come short of it. He said, you got to get this right, Paul was saying. Let us fear that we don't get this right. We must get it right. Paul wrote this around 60 AD. So it's clear that the early church obviously had not fully entered into this position of rest, because he was still writing this to them about 60 AD. Hebrews 4:2, for unto us the gospel was preached as well as unto them, that the word did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. And then he goes on to say this in verse 3, for we which have believed do enter into rest. And as he said, as I have sworn it in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished for them from the foundation of the world. What does that mean? He said, you need to come into rest because everything was sorted out for you before you even came to this world. Your destiny, your purposes, God's plan for you before you ever came here. This is what he is saying. Your works were finished from the time of the foundation of the world. Can you trust God then? If your works were finished, his plan for you, his purposes for you, things you would have to face and things which you have to go through, time to come into rest. For he that entered into rest has ceased from his own works as God did for his. So let us labor to enter in to rest. That contradiction is there again, laboring to enter into rest. You know, that word, it's interesting. That word labor is a Greek word which means to be earnest, diligent, to make it a priority. That is labor. Make it a priority. It's important. You're not going to proceed far unless you get this right. Numbers chapter 14:22, because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt, in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now 10 times, and have not listened to my voice. See, lack of rest is based in unbelief. Physical rest is not a problem, but emotional rest is. Fear, you see, is an emotion which affects the rest of our emotions, our will and our mind. And our emotions affect our physical body. You know, there is an emotion attached to every disease known to man. It's a negative emotion. Now, when we enter into rest, we have access to our inheritance. You do not have access to your final inheritance, God's final purposes for you in this age, you don't have access to that. You cannot access it until you come into rest. So that's how important it is. We have everything we need to finish our course. It's been taken care of before we even came to this earth. That's what the scripture says. Our rest and our inheritance are connected. See, in Deuteronomy 12:9 and 10, Deuteronomy 12:9, for as yet you have not come into the rest and your inheritance, which the Lord your God is giving you. Verse 12, but when you cross over Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and he gives you rest from your enemies round about, so that you might dwell safely. There's some difficult times ahead. There's going to be, our main battles are internal. If we get this right, the external battles won't be a problem. But they're internal. Fear, unbelief, all those battles on the inside, anger, jealousy. These are giants you have to overcome, and they're internal. The promised land is internal. But when you cross over Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God has given you to inherit, and gives you rest from all of your enemies round about, so that you might dwell safely. And so those enemies, you see, are internal. They're not out there. You're not going to beat the enemy out there until you beat the enemies in here. It's important to understand that. They're inside us. Mind, emotions affect your will, and fears and unbelief. See, the devil can't handle a person who's coming to rest. He doesn't know what to do with it. He can't ruffle them. And it is a powerful weapon against the enemy, because it's based in absolute trust in the Lord and in the goodness of God. He can't handle that. He can't do anything with that. So rest brings you under a canopy, a safe place, a secret place of the Most High. Your inheritance was the promised land, the fullness of your salvation. And it's only achieved as you come into rest and let God be God in your life. Joshua chapter 1, verse 13. It says, remember the word which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is giving you rest and is giving you this land. There's much land yet, personally, for us to be conquered and for us to enter into. But we have to come into rest. You are the land. You are the promised land. It's not something out there. It's in here. David's tabernacle is in here. But we've got to get rid of the enemies in here. They're internal. The promised land is the fullness of Christ in you. The final stage of the journey, the promised land, an open heaven. But you have to first come into rest. Paul the Apostle said this in Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 17. He said, now with whom he was angry for 40 years. Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? Verse 18. And to whom he did swear they would not enter into their rest. See, that's where the battle is. So we see they could not enter in because of unbelief. Therefore, since a promise still remains of entering into his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to come short of this, because you cannot proceed unless this battle is won. They did not believe that God would take care of them. And this is critical for us today in what lies ahead and then over the next few years. There were giants in the land, and there are giants ahead of us. The Apostle Paul said this in Hebrews chapter 3:17. We just read how he was angry with them for 40 years. And he said the promise still remains for us today. So they said, well, we'll stay in the wilderness. Okay? A lot of Pentecostal, those charismatics going to make this choice. We'll stay where we are. We're happy. See, in the wilderness, they had air conditioning, the cloud. They had food. They had water. And it wasn't too bad a life. Although it was a wilderness, it wasn't too bad a life. And we've got water, healing. We have prophetic words in the wilderness that this is a new day. They said, we're quite happy where we are. Why should we go into something which is unknown to us? Now, we are clearly told in the New Testament that the things that happened to them in trying to get into the promised land, their journey and everything, was for this generation. An example for this generation. 1 Corinthians 10:9. Nor let us tempt Christ as some of those tempted and were destroyed by serpents. That was in the wilderness. Nor complain. That's another important one. As some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. Well, they just complained. Now, all these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the age are come. So it was written for you and I, primarily. We are faced with a choice, that which will determine the rest of our lives on earth and also in heaven. This is a pivotal year, and we need to make the choices to move on. You can stay in Pentecost, you can stay where you were and be happy, but you will die in the wilderness. You haven't won the battle on the inside. So, there were two trumpet sounds which they had in the wilderness. One, when the cloud started to move, a priest was sitting up in a high place watching that cloud. When it started to move, he'd blow a trumpet. And that was, get ready, pack up. It's not going to be the same. And they may have been there, for 9 months in that place. But he said, pack up, we're moving on. It wasn't too easy. They had cattle, they had all kinds of stuff, and they had to pack it all up and get ready. Then came the second trumpet. When the second trumpet sounded, it was a particular sound which was called an alarm. The trumpet sound was specifically played in such a way that it was an alarm. And it means move out, because if you don't, the cloud is going to move, the pillar of fire is going to move, and you'll be left behind. There was a warning, first of all. And it's Numbers chapter 10, verse 2, make you 2 trumpets of silver, that you may use them for the calling of the assembly and for the journeying of the camps. And when they shall blow with them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And when they blow an alarm, Numbers 10:5, then the camps that lie on the east part shall start to move. So it was an alarm. The last few years, God has been sounding an alarm. And he's been very, very patient. He's been sounding an alarm. The cloud is going to move on. Don't get left behind. The trumpet is sounding. Move out. It's an alarm. You see, it's kind of interesting. Time and chance. There was a time and a chance. The interesting scripture, in Ecclesiastes 9:11, it says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill. But it says this, but time and chance happened to them all. Well, time and chance. That word chance comes from a Hebrew word which means opportunity, impact and opportunity. So time and chance. Chance happens to us all. It's how we respond to it. Because, chance, a period of time when we can move on and our lives take a different course, or we go further on in the purposes of God for our life. Time, the right time, and the chance happens to us all. And when we make the right choices, we move on. But if we don't, we're left behind. Right now, this scripture is very important for us today. I returned and saw under the sun, the race is not to the swift, the battle not to the strong, but getting the timing right, understanding the time and the season which we have, and moving with us is critical. And it says the time and the chance to do it happens to all of us. You see, the prophet Isaiah said, and we know Isaiah 60 verse 2, for behold, darkness shall cover the earth, gross darkness the people, that the Lord shall rise upon you, and his glory shall be seen upon you. Time and chance, you see. It comes a time. A number of years ago, I was caught up into a vision where I found myself on a boat. We were out at sea on a boat, and the Lord was in the boat. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And I noticed he had an instrument in his hands, which was a sextant. A sextant was used, particularly in the old days. We didn't have satellites back then. But they used a sextant to take a position of a star on the horizon to find out exactly where they were. So he had an instrument in his hand, which was used to plot the position at sea. The Lord took a bearing from the horizon. Then he took another bearing on this instrument for a very bright star. And I was watching this. The Lord took a bearing from the horizon to a star, and I noticed that on the arc on the sextant was only had 14 segments. And that stood out, and I thought, well, that must be important. And I looked at the Lord, and he said to me, the time spoken of in the word regarding the morning star is beginning, and the morning star will become brighter and brighter. I will arise in my people like never before, and at evening time it shall be light. And I thought, wow, okay. Right, to be honest, right at the time, the full impact of that didn't impact me. But Zechariah chapter 4 and verse 7, it said, behold, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, that it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. Now, there's another seeming contradictions at evening time in the world is getting darker and darker and darker out there, But for God's people who are moving with him, it shall be a day of great light. God is arising into a new day. Malachi 4:2, but unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise, listen, with healing in his wings. And you shall go forth and grow up of calves in the stall. And you shall tread down the wicked, for there shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in that day, that I shall do this, saith the Lord. So he's talking about the Son of Righteousness. Now, I think that 14 was 14 years. But I'm not going to tell you the year I had that. Otherwise, people will start working out all kinds of stuff. There's enough to say we are very close to the final. Time and chance is happening to us, and it will only happen this one time. Time and chance is happening to us now. The Son of Righteousness will arise in his people, healing them. You see, with healing in his wings, healing them of every weakness, every sickness, broken DNA. Our DNA is so important because we have really no idea what's happened in our ancestral line, what they really got up to, good and bad. Okay? And I had an experience 3 weeks ago, maybe a bit longer. And I had this group of people come into my room, just where I'm sitting now, into this room. And there were about maybe 10 people, and I didn't know who they were, except I recognized one man who had white hair, and I knew he was my grandfather. I never knew my grandfather. So I knew he was my grandfather on my mother's side. And I knew this man was a preacher in the Welsh revival. But they all stood there. Some of them are even children. And this man looked at me, and I said, "Who are you? Who are you? And why are we here?" He said, and it was very kind of interesting. They looked at me and said, "We need you to finish the course." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we are not complete until you finish the course." And he handed me a baton. Now, there are all kinds of different kinds of baton, but this baton was passing from one generation to another, which went back way to the Welsh revival and beyond. And I thought, they said, "The time is come. You are the final generation. We're relying on you to finish it." I thought, great, put that responsibility on me. But the point is, we're right there at this time. The Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. Healing. See, in a background, we really don't know what some of our ancestors have been up to. What sins, what atrocities, whatever. And it's like, yeah, when there's gross sin happening in our ancestral line, it leaves a mark in our DNA. The DNA is broken. And that area of our DNA, the frequency of the resonance of the DNA changes, which can affect us physically and all mind. We need healing. We need healing. We need to confess the sins of our forefathers. We need to ask God to heal our DNA and restore it. And see, the Bible says, "I will restore the years that the cankerworm, the caterpillar, all that's eaten into our lives, infected our DNA, infected our emotions, He said, "I will restore, I will restore." We're on the verge of one of the greatest events in the whole of history, and the greatest ingathering of new believers that the world has ever seen. And we need to be prepared for this. So every time there is a major change, time and chance in the season, decisions are made whether Christians will be a part of that or not. And we are right there. Closing with this. A few years ago, I had this vision of a large mountain. It had a very sharp peak like this. And rain started to fall onto this mountain. And I thought, well, what is this? Then I had a close-up look at this. And there were people at the top of the mountain, quite a few people. And I noticed that the rain was falling at the top of the mountain, went down one side of the mountain and down the other side of the mountain. So the water was flowing down the mountain. At the top, it was all at one point. But the time it reached the bottom of the mountain, they were miles apart. The rain came down there. At the top, they were together. And I thought, okay. So the rain was falling, drops were on both sides of the mountain. They're together at the top and at the bottom. I saw some people, I saw a couple close together at the top. The two people that were holding hands. One fell on one side of the peak and the other on the other. And by the time the water, the stream reached the bottom, they were miles apart from each other. And I said, "Lord, what is this? What is this?" And he said, "A division is coming among my people. And when it is finished, there will be a great difference in where these people stand." Times and seasons are upon us. And we need to make the right choices. Because in 2 or 3 years from now, we'll either be miles apart from the others. you know. And so it's important. The great division is coming. It's time to embrace everything that God is saying to us in this hour. But we have to come into rest in order to enter in. And coming into rest is that we are determined. We are determined to trust God. We come into rest and peace. You will never make it until you come into rest and peace. Let God be God in your life. You've got to come to a place where you can 100% trust the Lord, no matter what is happening. All this is being determined for you before this world was even created. He saw the finish of it. Trust Him to bring you to that place in God. God bless you.